All right, Paddock Rinn, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thank you,
Good
man,
to,
so much for having me.
we were debriefing for about 15 minutes now about you and your life and various shared interests. But for those listening that have no idea who the heck you are, what you do, why you're sitting in front of me on a screen, can you give us the quick and dirty summary?
Sure. Absolutely. My name is Paddock Rinn, and I am the founder of a global nonprofit called Project Possible that I founded 15 years ago. We empower developing countries, local charities to help their disabled kids better. So we teach people in countries and communities how to fish, and we basically give it in through a code of honor, just our word, and we give it to them as the community. We don't own anything. We're 100% volunteer. All of our teams are, and everybody pays their own way. So all of the money we raise goes to all of our projects across the globe.
And can you give a few examples of projects that you've done or places you've worked?
Yeah, currently we're in 6 countries. Our current country, I'm actually in Mexico right now. I live in the country for a couple of years as we're opening each country to explore and find the proper local charities, non-government affiliated charities. And we come in and find out their needs, whether it's financial, anything like that. The countries that we started in was Tanzania after I was born with cerebral palsy, and I was the first person to climb Mount Kilimanjaro unassisted with cerebral palsy. And during that trip in 2008, I just fell in love with the Tanzanian people and saw that there was nothing for disabled kids that we could find. So I said right then and there, if I get out of this mountain alive, I was like, fuck it. I'm going to start a global foundation and we're going to help as many as people. And we're starting right here in Tanzania, somewhere around the giant mountain. And our first center is in Faraja, Tanzania. And it's fantastic. And now we're in northern Uganda. We built an entire campus after Joseph Kony, after 25 years, the warlord that used the child soldiers. We're in northern Uganda with a massive campus there for this amazing local charity called Adina Foundation Uganda. We're in Kenya with the Maasai tribe, which is arguably some of the oldest living tribe in the world, still trying to be as it was. So that center serves 750 Maasai tribes. And then we have a center, a second one in Tanzania that has extremely disabled children that we're just trying to give them a peaceful, loving like life because their lifespan is going to be very short with how severe their disabilities are. So we just try to give them a beautiful roof over their head to come stay, to clean, shower, like all the things that they don't get probably in a very poor part of a town called Moshi, Tanzania. And we have one now in Nicaragua. And now I'm exploring Mexico and how we can best attack a large, large country like Mexico.
Bro, you're one of the good ones, aren't you? You're like one of those dudes. You're like, oh, you're just genuinely one of the good ones out there. That's incredible, man. That's wonderful. And I'm like even more honored to have you here. And one thing you said that really stood out to me that I want to follow up on was you said, if I get off this mountain alive, which to me implies that there was a possibility that you were going to die doing something. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that or share a bit more of those stories. Why did you
Sure.
start climbing a giant mountain in Africa, etc.?
Yes. So I grew up in Orange County, California. First Arcadia, which is just outside Orange County. I think you're from Southern California or LA area. So I was in Arcadia till 7th grade. Mom took a job in Orange County closer to her parents, and we lived in Mission Viejo and kind of finished up the rest of my kind of growing up there. And my family was divorced when my parents got separated when I was 8. But what that meant, or for why I'm saying the background, my family really wasn't good at talking about things. So we really just pretended shit didn't exist. And meaning problems, Bonner's disability, that I was misdiagnosed for 11 years. And the challenging part, from what I understand, I was a kid, I don't recall much of this, but from what my mom shared is that until I was 11, I was misdiagnosed, and they just knew that I kind of walk like, I call it a penguin. when I lived in Nicaragua, they called me El Pinguino. So it's just think of like very stiff legs. That's what my cerebral palsy effects is like. So I kind of do this waddle. I tripped a lot as a kid because I don't really have an equilibrium or the equivalent of something like that. So my feet grew real fast. And so I tripped and fell a lot with really skinny legs. It's like a straw with a knot tied as the knee. That's literally what my brother called me decaf growing up. So yeah, so I had the skinniest legs someone had seen. And as I grew up, we never talked about my disability. So the entire journey is that until I worked for the Anaheim Ducks and Henry and Susan Samueli, who bought the Ducks from Disney when we were in the NHL lockout. We were asked to join a charity. He's like, they said, we're not going to lay anybody off. So they said, join a charity. And that was the first time I wrote on my application that I had cerebral palsy because I knew they were so philanthropic. I thought that they had a great heart and they wouldn't. I was always in fear that people wouldn't hire me if I wrote cerebral palsy in there under the job application of having a disability because my family never talked about it. So then it must be something awful that I have. So I must be bad, or something part of me was bad. And I kind of grew up with that scared feeling that I'm going to get found out. And as I got to the Ducks, I felt safer because my boss hired me. He knew me, that I had cerebral palsy. He knew me before this job. And in the lockout, so I was like, okay, I'm going to go join a local charity. And I just Googled cerebral palsy Orange County and found a local charity in Orange County that was like, oh, this fits exactly. It. Called the head guy, talked to him. He's like, wow, this is a cool story. Can we meet for lunch? Asked me to come see the board. He's like, I'd like you to meet the board of directors. And I was like, cool. Went in there, never really, only talked to maybe 5 or 6 people about my CP directly. And I thought I was going to throw up. Well, there was one chair and it ended up being next to this board member that had a boy that had really severe CP, but I didn't know who this man was. And I just kind of shared my story. And he sent me an email that night and he just said, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Steve Robert. I was sitting next to you. I have a son named Jake. He has very severe CP. I just want to let you know that you give my wife and I hope. And it was just like this, like emotional, like feeling that was just like a punch to the heart that was like, wow, for being honest about something that I lied about for a lot of my life, that I can give people hope. It was just like the heart exploded in a good way. And I was just like, I'm going to do everything I possibly can for the rest of that's what I just told myself. And it was just ignited this fire in me at 29 years old that I was going to keep going. And 6 months later, we were one of the recipients of the Orange County Marathon race. So all the board members are going to do the 5K or the half. So I was like, I'll do a half. I've never really run that far, my legs and everything else. And so I ended up running with Steve, Jakey's dad, that day. And it took about 8.5 miles for Steve. He's an amazing sweet talker. He's great at sales. And so he convinced me to keep going on the full with him instead of where at 8.5, it goes to the half and goes to the finish line. So I was like, oh yeah, I could totally do a full. That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, well, that didn't go so well, but I made it to the water station where our charity was and got a ride to the finish line. And we saw Steve carry his son Jake across the finish line. It was awesome. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. It was so beautiful. And then Jakey died that night in his sleep. And it was just like, I had called in sick because I was stiff as a board and I couldn't walk the next day. So I just cried and cried and cried on the couch. And it was just one of those things that it was like, I'm never going to let this happen to another Jakey out there. And I got to figure out how to take this even bigger. And so the next year I dedicated the whole marathon to running it. And they formed this amazing team called Team Jake to come back and celebrate their son's life every year at this marathon. Per se was the last moment that all the family was together. And it's this powerful thing that just taught me, which I didn't know at the time, was even through the greatest, I think, a loss of a child, I don't know if there's much worse in this world is losing your child, that they would form Team Jake in that and make it a positive experience. I ran that full last year, and the owners of the Ducks and our general manager, Brian Burke, and all these people, they donated. Next thing you know, raised like 30 grand and the light went on. If I do physical things because I have a disability, but I am doing a lot better than Jakey. I have more years than Jakey. I can do something probably pretty crazy. So what's the next thing that I do? And I just researched, and I'm a marketing and sales guy. That was my career. And I fucking thought of Kilimanjaro, and I looked it up, and I was like, okay, Everest, no chance, guaranteed I'm gonna die. So let's put it into context where it's gonna push my limits, but it's something that I think I can actually believe I can do. So that's how we got to Kilimanjaro, and had shown up there and just fell in love with those people. And yeah, I had no business being on the mountain. I don't know how to camp. I didn't grow up in a family that knew about like any of that stuff. We camped on Catalina Island, you know, where the buffalo are, and you get to bring your boogie board, and it was like catered meals. It was not very. I grew up in South Orange County, so very privileged. And yeah, my water froze on summit night because it was minus 30 degrees, and nobody told me to take it out of my camelback and put it in my chest in the front. So my hose froze in 15 minutes outside of camp. So I had no water, and you can't wait when it's that cold, as you know. You can't wait for people. So each person has their guide, and everybody just spreads out like a yard sale all over this summit morning. And I was the last one in the group, so everybody was already way ahead of me. And so I went 7.5, 8 hours, no water. That goes well at 16, 17, 18,000 feet. On day 6 of already getting smashed for 6 days with my legs and everything. So I got to the ridge, which was a little bit before the summit. I had no idea where I was. I literally felt like super drunk is the best way. Um, my guide was really concerned. He couldn't speak English. So it's this fascinating thing of learning the art of trying to communicate with a guy that can't even really communicate. Me being me, the one that can't communicate. And everybody was up on the ridge, and then they gave me some sugary lemon water and all kinds of things. And so I bounce back enough that they're like, okay, we got to get him to the top if he can make it, and we got to get him back down as fast as possible. So I remember people just hitting me in the sides of the arms, like, you know, just like, hey, you doing good? And I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know, and everything like that. So and then I started throwing myself down the scree hill at the end because I didn't have enough strength with my legs to walk down the hill. So I started doing Pete Rose headfirst slides all the way straight down the mountain and then over to my shoulder. So I'd just dive in gloves and these huge jacket and everything. And it was just like, it's the only way I'm going to get down to our base camp. And so people just looked at me and was like, holy shit, like, what a nightmare day. And you're somehow still alive. And I was like, so I sat in the tent that night, you know, I was like, yep, I definitely got to do a foundation now. There's no joke. They got me off the mountain. So I got to do something big.
I just thought when you said I was really having a hard time communicating with a guy that doesn't know how to communicate, I imagine a lot of people listening to that were like, "Oh, I know what that's like, bro. I know what it's like to talk to a man that can't communicate."
That was me. I was very
That
good at that.
that's a crazy story, man. So you made it back, you got up
Mm-hmm.
to the summit, made it back
Mm-hmm.
down, and then
Yep.
you're like, I'm gonna start a foundation and really explore this more.
Yep. And then we built our first center in Tanzania. They said like a wedding, ask twice as many people to the board as you want to on there. So I was hoping for around 14, 16 because it was going to be all volunteers, and 31 out of 32 said yes. So I was like, okay, we're going to have a monstrosity of a board, which we did. And then they made a documentary about my climb, and Michael Clark Duncan from the Green Mile ended up narrating the documentary for free. He just thought it was cool what I was doing. And so got to know him real well. He pushed it to Hollywood and through all of his friends like Will Smith. And he used to be a bodyguard for Tupac and Will Smith and like all these crazy adventures. And so they all pushed, you know, in a beautiful way. And there I was smack dab in the spotlight, not ready for any of it because I didn't even know what type of CP I had like to start this. So I had a deep depression for over a year after that because I was chasing validation and love and acceptance and everything all the way up Kilimanjaro. When I got home, I thought it would be a magic pill if I was doing this to help other people, but yet got home and still felt empty in certain places. So it was this gnarly confluence of two different, you know, emotions that why don't I feel great about doing this? We just raised over $250,000 for the kids, and we're launching a global foundation. I mean, this should be the happiest time of my life, yet it wasn't at all. And it was really scary because it was a whole part of myself that opened up that I had no idea was there.
Does that relate to what you said earlier about when you applied for that? You applied to that charity, and it was the first time that you had written cerebral palsy on an application because it seems that you had lived so much of your life denying a part of who you are or hiding it, or it's like a shame box, right? You're like, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. You're an expert in the imposter syndrome, but for me, I would say that there was a big part of my life that I honestly realized I felt like a total imposter, total much lying about something and pretending to be something that I wasn't when I was really something there. And it's just like the guilt that came with that, the shame that came with that was so overwhelming for that year. It was just hard to breathe, and it was
So, sorry,
very confusing.
just to clarify, like what were you lying about, or what were you pretending to be that you weren't?
People would say like, "Oh, did you hurt your ankle?" or "Oh, did you hurt your knee?" You know, when I'd walk, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I did it in soccer. Oh, I did it running. Oh, I did it working out." So I'm literally not even answering the basic question is, yeah, I've got cerebral palsy because I was terrified that people wouldn't like me, all kinds of other things. So I was flat out lying to people's faces.
Gotcha. You, you skipped that part.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
you're good. Okay, so you knew this deep down, but you were raised in a family system that didn't talk about it, and then socially you hid it, lied about it, avoided it, and then you kind of on paper lived these great dreams. You summited a huge mountain, you set up a foundation, you were getting connected with celebrities, you were changing lives. On paper, it was the classic like white picket fence life, but something was missing. And so, do you mind speaking to that sort of year of darkness that you alluded to, or how you got out of that or through that?
Yeah. And Michael Clark Duncan, MCD, became like a close guy that I would call because he shared a lot of his family stuff when we were in the studio recording the voiceovers. I just had a great bond with him. He and I were brothers. He called me his brother. Um, he was just a beautiful soul that really, I think, saw me, and I always felt really comfortable and safe around him. So when I was having struggles, I'd call him and just chat if he would, and he would take my call a lot of times if he was available. And we just chat a little bit, and he would be that guy that just kind of pumped me up. But most of the way I dealt with, sadly, is I just sunk myself into achieving more and more and more to try to chase that, dopamine hit. That was of succeeding or achieving things because that's the only way that I felt got acknowledged or as a child growing up was when I achieved well. And then I got the acknowledgement and was able to get the love or the attention that I wanted from my parents.
Mm.
So it was a lot of dopamine hits through, my career was going extremely well and was very good at what I did. And then I also did it through just the challenges of like, I just kept dating women like so fast, as many women as like if one didn't work out, boom, as soon as it got hard, I'd break up with them and I'd go out with somebody else. And then as soon as it got difficult and I may have to get close to my emotions, I would go out with somebody else. And I just repeated that pattern. I called it lily pad hopping like a frog. It would just be, and it was a desperate search for love and for connection and for and what I really look at it now was I was really trying to connect to the part of me with my disability, with my cerebral palsy that I had shunned for so long. I just didn't know how to go inward and begin to love that part of me that I completely ignored, lied about, everything else that just felt my capabilities weren't going to be able to do that.
Yeah, damn. Okay. And so I feel like this is like a page turning novel. Right? I need some popcorn, bro. Or I'm like, and then what happened? And then what did you do? So you have these sort of epiphanies, these realizations, like I am filling the void with more stuff, more external, extrinsic rewards, women, vices, etc. But it's like the void is like quicksand, it just disappears, and you have to perpetually keep throwing more bigger things in there to fill that space.
Yeah.
And imagine you're frustrated and despondent and pissed off and all the things. Was there and then you're chatting with a celebrity who has a voice that is maybe as deep as your own, and I imagine that conversation was baritone terrific. And like, is there at some point, did you have an epiphany, or did you connect with a therapist, or was there a turning point where you started coming up out of that hole towards wholeness or healing or something of that nature?
Um, it wasn't a therapist. The turning point for me was it took almost a year and a half to recover my body to recover from Kilimanjaro. So I was fortunate to be an Oakley athlete during that world record attempt. And then I stayed really close with them. And then when I got medical clearance, they were like, well, what's next? And I literally looked at them and I was like, so this is still filling the void. I said, who do you know in triathlons? And the guy that is my sponsor literally fucking looked down at the table at me and he goes, don't you fucking say you're going to do the Ironman. And I just started laughing and I was like, what? I just want to ask some questions. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to show up more prepared, and everything else. And they're like, who works for us? And I said, no. And they're like, Greg Welch, the Ironman world champion, works for us at Oakley. And I was like, no shit. And so they said, I just need a few more copies of your documentary. They walked over to his office. They gave him the documentary and he's like, he's an Aussie. So he's like, what the hell is this, mate? And they're like, and he goes, can you just watch this? And then he goes, why? And then he says, this guy just wants to talk to you about to learn about the Ironman. He goes, I don't coach anybody, and they go, we're not asking for that. We just want you to watch the documentary. Well, apparently he had a flight the next day. He watched it. He called the guy that was my contact back and said, I'll have that lunch with that guy. And literally I had the lunch with him and he said, and I said, why did you have lunch with me? And he goes, there's a part in that documentary that you bonked. You were done. He goes, us as triathletes and Ironmen, he goes, when we hit that and our whole body just shuts down and we collapse like a house of cards onto the ground, he goes, we never get back up. He goes, you fucking got up and you somehow still got to the summit that day. He goes, it's mind boggling what that takes. And he goes, I want to know. And he goes, so he did every great job of scaring the shit out of me for 2 hours at this lunch at Wahoo's Tacos. And he just did a great job. And then he says, well, you're going to do it after that? And I said, I need some time to think on this. I need to figure this out. I'm not just going to jump in like I did last time. So I called him like 2 weeks later and just said, I had a couple more questions. And the last question was, if I do this, would you coach me? And he goes, are you saying you're going to do it? Or are you asking me if I'm going to coach you? And I said, I'll do it if you coach me. And then he says, let's fucking do it. And so this guy built this insane 2-year training program for me. And Oakley came out and just said, we're going to support this with everything we got as well. And they came up with my own signature eyewear. That it's the only time in the history Oakley's come up with a signature eyewear that they gave 100% of the sales, because they're like, you're the only athlete of ours that funds his entire foundation out of his own pocket. So 100% of this money we know is going to directly go to the next project. So they made 250 pairs, sold them at $250, and we sold them out in 2 days. And so we created this thing where Welchie's like, the only way you're finishing this is if you actually learn to really know everything about your body. And Welchie was almost like that therapist that really got me to really listen to my body and to listen to myself. He goes, that angry shit is not that you had on the mountain. It's not going to get you through. If you're going to do the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii, he's like, that's not going to get you there, buddy. It's going to barely get you out of the water. So I said, okay. So I spent those 2 years with him really learning how to love my body, which meant I had to love my cerebral palsy. And so it became this amazing journey, because he goes, one small injury in this training, he goes, can put you out for months. So you have to be so in tune with your body. The thing that I shamed and lied about became the actual thing that is going to propel me to attempt this next world record. And so we did the Ironman World Championship, and I finished with 21 minutes left out of the 17-hour cutoff. And I was like, but it was this amazing thing because that whole community supports and loves each other. And as they go by, they always cheer each other on. It's the most bizarre thing. And he goes, this isn't a competition about anybody. This is actually something against yourself. So you have to learn that you're only in competition with yourself. That's the true Ironman world champion mentality, is you're not there to beat anybody else. You're there to push your own limits. And I was like, okay, okay. And I had to just switch that over 2 years with him as my coach. He literally was that person that brought me out of that dark, dark thing slowly but surely. And I actually started really, really loving my body, loving parts that I just thought I never could. And so it was a very emotional and beautiful journey with that man. I owe him so much gratitude for what he's done. He's just a pure genius in what he did for both me personally and how he designed the entire race so that I could have a chance to finish.
Well, Jesus, man. So you're an Iron Man. That's crazy. Uh, as you started telling that story, my brain switched on. I was like, oh yeah, I knew this. I read about this. Um, did you make a documentary about that Iron Man experience also?
Um, no, after the Iron Man, it kind of again takes a fun turn. My agent and manager is actually a guy that just I met in the sports industry when I started a few years back before that, and he's never taken a dime for anything, but he's this genius. He was like the global managing director of IMG Consulting, the largest agency in the world, and I think he was at that in his early 30s. And so he calls me and he's like, hey, awesome, congratulations, insane what you just did. Da, 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 da. And he goes, I got an idea to float. You want to hear my next idea? And I was like, maybe. And he's like, we're going to write a book. And I was like, that's the fucking dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, nobody's going to read this stupid thing. And he's like, he goes, oh, I beg to differ. I beg to differ. And so he says, would you just have a call with, this literary agent and our executive vice president who handles all of your speaking gigs, Sandy Montag. Would you just have a call with us three and we can kind of share more? Had the call. I was like, David Aberton. I was like, I trust this guy more than anything. He's never wanted anything, but he saw something in me before I did. So I said, if you think this is a good idea, he's like, yep, we're going to do a co-writer. They're going to do this. You're going to do this. This is how it works. I'm like, oh, okay. Did not even know that because I was like, I don't have time. And met the guy that they thought might be a good fit. And we interviewed each other. And I asked him like three main questions. And yeah, 2 years later, the book came out. And it was crazy because we were hoping to get $5,000 as a starter. Well, it ended up being mid six-figure advance. And we were just like, what? And I just had no idea. It just was mind blowing. I was like, there's 6 companies that were bidding on us. And when I was at the IMG offices in New York, and I was like, this is bonkers. Like, what is going on? And the first 2 months, it went New York Times best-selling with no marketing budget, zero, none. So you're just like laughing. I'm just like, this is the weirdest thing ever. And the back cover is me in spandex standing with my bike and, getting ready for the Ironman. And it's like, holy cow, that my body is like kind of the back cover is a fascinating concept for me because it was the thing that I hated so much and the thing that I thought, but it's actually the thing that's my greatest gift. And I didn't learn that till Ironman, is that the greatest gift I got is the ability to use my legs and my hands and everything else that a lot of the people that have disabilities, especially CP, aren't really able to do, and nowhere near really most of them the ability that I have.
How did that feel to share your story and to have your body be seen by so many people after spending so long hiding all of that?
Yeah, it's super nerve-wracking, because it's also that dishonest part that I felt like I was now in control of and don't need to lie about that stuff. But those lies also, stemmed all these other places in my life. It just wasn't about my disability because it just made that like barrier broken. So once I repaired that barrier and had a strong boundary around it, you still write a book. You can't change, you can't go back and be like, oh, just kidding. That wasn't really true, because I've seen it in the press. People get blasted and it got me really nervous. So I just was like, okay, Neil, I trust this guy like a brother that wrote it. And I was like, okay, I think it's as true as I know it. And so you just have to trust. And it was something that I learned to do with people that hadn't done anything bad to me. So it's just a great lesson to kind of put it out there, and never had any issues. And people just responded amazingly well to the book. And more celebrities and athletes jump behind it. And it really helped to have, like, like Nolan Ryan and his family and a bunch of others that really jump behind it. And it's like just incredible, the people that have come into the life from that disabled community. Nolan Ryan's only grandson has cerebral palsy, and all these things. So it's pressure. It was a pressure, but it was also a beautiful, like, freedom, just to be like, here I am, I'm in spandex. This is the back cover of the book, and here's everything that I think is true about me. So here's my whole life, basically. So standing in the classroom in your underwear, and be good with it.
Yeah, it sounds very liberating what you described there.
It was scary as hell until the launch party at Oakley. And then as soon as everybody was there and everything else afterwards, and it's just the sales started skyrocketing, it was like, okay, I feel good. I feel safe.
Yeah. I'm realizing I probably should have asked this at the beginning of the conversation, but what is cerebral palsy, and how does it work? I must admit that I'm quite ignorant in that realm, but
And
you
yeah,
talk about that?
sure, absolutely. I can do it now, not when I was 29, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So,
glad I'm not interviewing that guy.
oh my God, I would have been sweating bullets and everything else, and would have been like, had really cotton mouth. The best way I describe cerebral palsy, just to keep it more simplistic, and I know it's not simplistic, but just a kind of an entry point for a lot of people. A great way to do it is, think, for me, the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck during the birth canal. So healthy baby up till then. And literally when you turn, it's really easy that the umbilical cord it's like a garden hose. It can get wrapped around all types of things. And unfortunately, the tightest place is between your shoulders and your head, which is your neck. It can slide up or down. And if it's wrapped too tightly, like mine was twice, it doesn't usually detangle or untangle. So it acts like a noose, and it just starts choking you. So there's this vital time that they have to get you out of the canal, because they can't do a C-section then. So it's this race against time, and random parts of your brain are dying in these moments. And that's why there's such varying abilities, of cerebral palsy, where you see people, unfortunately, very, like Jakey couldn't walk or talk. He couldn't use his hands. He couldn't even communicate with his eyes. They were just trying to teach him to go yes or no with his eyes, like up or down or left and right. And they weren't really getting far even with that. That's a very severe case. And then myself, who just kind of has a little bit of stiff legs every morning when I wake up, I just have a 30-minute stretch routine that I got to do. But it's just random parts of your brain that die. That's why sometimes speech is slurred. That's why sometimes it's like the arm is really tight. So if you see anybody with like really tight, curled in hands, arms, things like that, there's a good chance that that part of their brain has died, and the default switches to stiff. So the brain will try to do, it's better than being a wet noodle on the ground, is what your brain thinks. So it will default until you can try to figure out how to reprogram that part of your brain. And that's why you have occupational speech and physical therapy. That's really important for kids with cerebral palsy. So, but yeah, mine was the umbilical cord wrapped around my neck, and had no issues or any reason to believe that there was anything wrong with me up until then. So, but it's one of the biggest disabilities in the world. And most people have heard of it, but don't really know what it actually is. So if you ever see anybody with a really stiff leg and stiff arm, or stiff legs, and a lot of them use walkers and stuff like that, or they may not be able to talk, but you look in their eyes, they're fully alive. They fully understand. I don't know if have you ever seen the story that Hoyt's, the father and son team Hoyt, where he did the Ironman World Championship, and he swam with his son in the boat, and then he rides the bike. He was on, like, oh my gosh, it's on ESPN, it's on HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. Like, it's one of the most incredible, like, stories. They did the Ironman World Championship multiple times, but it's Dick and Rick Hoyt. And so Dick was more severe, but his dad knew that he could actually understand him, but they didn't have any devices at that time to really get into his brain. But now he can tap his head, and his first sentence was "Go Bruins." because they live in Boston. So it's like most people under at cerebral palsy fully understands what's going on, but that's something part of their brain may not be able to eloquently somehow communicate it out their mouths. And that's when I really understood when I saw Jakey that I've got an opportunity and like, wow, it could have been worse. So yeah, there was a lot of survivor's guilt in that beginning part too. I think, once Jakey died too. So it's like I can push myself and do these things, but also felt like, why was I given this and Jakey wasn't?
Do you mind like saying more about that survivor's guilt? Like that's not a topic
Survivor,
that I've heard come up in the podcast very often. I
yes,
know what it is, but what's it like, etc.
For someone that is, I think, on the side of me or the way that it is Jakey's dad came to me during that race, like when we were out there the day before Jakey died. And, Steve confided in me and said that he was, really having a hard time connecting with this son versus his other two sons who were able bodied and everything else. And what I kind of, because he wanted to hear from me, who was able to communicate probably what Jakey was feeling. That linked something to me that was like, oh man, oh wow, like I actually am able to do all these things that his son is not. Yet I'm going to constantly be under scrutiny. I'm going to scrutinize myself, or my inner critic got even bigger that day because I was like, I'm not doing enough because I've got this abilities. I can use both my legs. I can use both my hands. I can use my voice. So I never gave myself any of that break in the beginning because I was like, I survived. So I've got to constantly achieve. I've got to constantly carry the flag for CP. And it became that whole defining thing of myself. It was like the lead definer of me. And that survivor's guilt of meaning that I didn't die at 4.5 and I'm able to do all these other things. I couldn't figure out in a healthy way why I was still living per se, and Jakey wasn't. And there was a lot of guilt with that. And also a lot of pressure that I didn't know how to deal with that I kept placing on myself. Nobody else placed it on me.
Yeah, it sounds like like you made your life a burden of sorts,
I
almost.
did for a long time. Yeah, for a long time, that was like I just put it on my shoulders and said, I'm going to carry this as big and as heavy and as hard, and wasn't taking any breathers. I just was relentless in what I did for a good 10 years of this time frame. Basically, my 30s was just this relentless, never slowing down at all. Was my 30s, and then, or just into the beginning of my 40s.
Yeah, and we talked before we started recording about how beautiful that can be in terms of fuel and motivation and drive and grit, but it's also burning the candle at both ends somewhat and unsustainable, etc. Did you
I couldn't get out of
realize?
bed.
Okay, I was gonna say, did you realize that the easy way or the hard way? And it sounds like,
The extremely hard way. So the book came out in 2015, and I was full time. I was senior vice president of a big liquor and wine distributor, and so I had that full time thing. Plus, I did over 100 and something speaking gigs that year, plus all the appearances for the book signings and everything else. Uh, by the time 2016 came around, by the end of 2015, I was like, I couldn't get out of bed towards the end of November. I was just exhausted. I mean, so exhausted. And so I went into my CEO's office that was also the owner of the company. And I just cried and was like, I think I have to um, retire, because I said, I can't do all these things, but my biggest passion is the foundation and everything to do with that. So if I have to give up something, I'm unfortunately have to give up this. And so he's like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Just go home and sleep for like a week or two. So I did. And um, I got a little more energy. We came up with a whole new role for me for 2 more years while I could transition and we could bring in somebody else for that whole thing. So by the end of 2017, then I officially retired and just said that I want to spend the rest of my life doing my foundation and speaking gigs and book signings.
dang. how are you now? Like, are you comfortable with naps and baths and rest now? Are you a different person?
I'm living in the land of the siesta, so it's a
Oh
good
yeah,
place,
that's
you know.
right.
Yeah, I'm living in the land of the siestas. So, yeah, there's a lot more balance. I think like what we were talking is like, did really began my deep dive into myself almost over 3+ years ago, and have just done a lot of work in that place to try to understand how to have balance, how to handle relationships, how to handle conflict, all the things that I didn't really understand. And it's actually helped tremendously in all parts of my life, including my foundation, especially. So, yeah.
And then I'm like somewhat cautious to ask this, but do you have a big audacious goal at the moment? Like, are you done climbing mountains? Are you done bungee jumping off of the space station? Like, or is there still some part of you that schemes and dreams big?
Are you talking like personal endeavors or the next crazy thing for the foundation or which? Because
Uh,
we got both in the works right now. So I'll just let you in on that. So I don't know which one you want to talk about first, but
Both.
both of
Yeah. I
them are
mean,
totally in the works.
yeah, let's hear all of it, man. Whatever you feel called to share.
All right, one leads kind of into the other. So we finally built a center here in the United States, and it's our global like training center. It's a virtual center. All of our centers in the world are called Team Jake centers after obviously Jakey. And what's beautiful about that is we also have a banner in each of the centers that are both in like, so in Tanzania it's in Swahili and it's in English, and it's Jake's beautiful face smiling like this, you know, and it tells the story of Jake and the foundation, and we believe it inspires all the kids that they're all Jakeys, so they can inspire all of their worlds as well, just like Jakey inspired mine. Well, we built one here in California, and it's virtually training all of our centers. So we're trying to raise all boats to the same level of our current centers. It's also a 9,000 square foot facility for all kids in California that it takes Medicare or Medi-Cal. I get confused on those, but it's the only one that really does in Orange County area, and also takes that don't have any insurance. So we built this one. Jakey's family came out. They live in Texas now. It came out to see it during Team Jake weekend. So we took them there to see it first. And we were chatting about stuff at lunch before with the head of our medical team. And they always bring friends from Texas of Jakey's brothers. And so the kids always ask, they're now men. They say like, oh, you know, what was like climb killing? Hey, would you ever do it again? And so one of the kids asked, "Hey, are you gonna go do Killy again?" And I literally looked at Jakey's dad, Steve, right across from me, and I was like, "Well, next year is the 15th anniversary of this first world record." And I said, I don't know if I'd ever do it again. I think I'd only do it if Steve did it." And Steve looks right at me and goes, "I'm in." And I was like, "Fuck." And his oldest son, Tyler, who's been over to our centers and stuff into Africa, I said, "Well, Ty, you in?" And he's like, "Hell yeah, I'm in." So, and then I looked at our head of our medical team and I was like, "Well, looks like we're climbing Kili next year for the 15th anniversary." So we haven't made any announcements or anything yet, but Steve, his two oldest sons, Tyler and Zach, are going to climb with us. And we brought back some of the original climbers, the lead team guide, our two master guides, who one of the master guides reached out to us 7 years ago and said that their local church is trying to help those really severe disabled kids. So what are the odds that the guy that was with us on Kili came and reached out to me for Facebook, and we built that center for his little poor community in Moshi. It's a beautiful thing. And so this project that we're going to take him to all again started with that. And so we're going back over there in July. We land July 15th, and we're going to take a different route. And I'm just in such a different place that it's really going to be a celebration of the 15 years of what all of us have accomplished together through love and through support. And it's just going to be like this cry fest. It's going to be this laughing fest. It's going to be this just epic of epic, things for us just to celebrate what an amazing impact we are doing. all while announcing that we are entering the final phase of the foundation, which is the $10 million research and development center that we're going to build. That's going to now break the glass ceiling. So we're going to build with our partners, which is the Children's Hospital Orange County. That's our partner in California that runs the center there. We're going to build the most cutting edge center that we believe for this to shatter the glass ceiling for many of the biggest common disabilities. And so it's going to be $10 million. And we're going to use the climb as kind of our kickoff for that. And we also just won the rights back of my book. So I actually own the rights of my book now again, which is nuts. So we've got kind of a few things in the works, and then we're developing a software that will be open sourced. So we're going to have all these training videos for the 178 countries that have YouTube. It's going to be all free through this software and everything, that they can join communities, even if there's no center near them in whatever part of the world they're in, but it'll be open sourced. So people can add their videos to it and everything else like that, so that we can train the whole world if they want to. So right now, 178 countries have YouTube. So we're going to per se own it, but we've already put it in a sense that it's as open source and free as it possibly can for forever. And that's going to take care of the now. And maybe some other centers like in Mexico or other places that have a big need for a center will still build those. So those are kind of the big, things that I'm working on for the next 2 years. And yeah, we're working with the largest charities in the world. So as people know the largest charities in the world, this software, we can skin it for them, give them the app and the software, and they can push it out to all their partners. They can utilize it for free. We'll just give it to all of the largest charities in the world. They're the ones that are going to be able to push it. That's the bridge that I feel like I can design to get that out there. It's my only chance. And so I'm now going to meet with all of them, and already have the first meeting with one of the largest in the world. And they're receptive to helping us design it and build it. And then we'll just give it to them, and we'll give it to other people as well, like World Health Organization, Red Cross, anybody that wants it. We're going to go approach all of them and just say, here, I know you guys want to support disabled kids. Here's your free thing. We just need you to push it out to all your things. We'll train you and push it out to your partners too, so they can have use of it no matter what remote area they are in the world.
That's incredible, man. That's really incredible. And I just had this flashback moment where I was in Europe over the summer, and I think got an Instagram message from you about going to Kili, because I was with Traver at the time, and you were like, hey guys, want to go climb a mountain in Africa?
Yep.
And I think
you want to come? We got 13 going. We got 2 more spots left. If you want to get a wild hair and go for it, we're going to be there. July 15th, we land. So, and we're going to go to our centers after that. And then we're going to go to a safari. So I start little companies in each country that we're in so that I can support locals. And when we meet our brothers in those countries, then it's my way of giving their dreams true. So there's 2 brothers of ours that are Tanzanian that always wanted to start their own safari company. They were always our guides. They check on our kids. They never want anything. So we have a little safari company over there called Fado Mwesi, which means the black rhino, the rarest of them all. The white rhino is the rarest of them all over there. So they named it after me. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Wow. Well, we're gonna have to chat about that. Because
I know you love hiking with Kendra.
If you follow me on Instagram and have seen my stories, you know how enthusiastic I am about uphill climbs. But I have actually been to Tanzania. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I spent about 3 months in Africa, maybe 4, in 2010. I went to the World Cup in South Africa, and then moseyed up the southeast coast, and I went to Mozambique and Swaziland. And I had a friend actually that was working in Dar es Salaam, and I had another friend that was working in Zanzibar. So I spent some time there.
Gorgeous. I've been there too. Beautiful.
Stunning, man. And there's something so sacred and surreal and special about being in Africa. There's a vibe in the air. The energetics of that whole continent are tangible.
100%.
All right. Well, I'm gonna have to avoid
thinking about
that. But that sounds super, super cool. My birthday is just after that time too, and I'm gonna be in Europe for I do a big walking retreat. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, the Camino. Absolutely. Traver was on it this year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so that's another potential thing for you to play around with doing the Camino. You know, if you want a big endeavor that people can follow along on, uh,
Yep.
highly recommend it. Very transformational. But we're getting off track. I so appreciate you trying to change my life with difficulty and adventure. What have we not hit on in this conversation that you're like, bro, why didn't you ask me this? Or I really need to say this out loud, or your audience has to know this thing. Is there anything that we've skipped over?
I think a lot of thing, one of the biggest things I've learned on my journey is that um, I feel like there may be what I've encountered through my own experiences is people sometimes approach me or tell me that the way that they think of a disability, and I don't challenge them in that, but what I love to ask them to reconsider or to consider something different is that I've realized because I don't have as great a use of my legs as maybe quote unquote an average person, or what I've taught to other people that have quote unquote disabilities, it actually gives us a greater appreciation, I think, for the use of legs, the simple things that we take for granted. And having a disability isn't actually, for me, isn't, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if I didn't have cerebral palsy. And I think when we see people with disabilities, we instantly have this like feeling of we feel sorry for them, or, like that's a bummer and everything. But what I've heard from most of them is that they wouldn't be who they are and they wouldn't understand and have appreciation for life the way they do if they didn't have it. And I think we always just immediately think that their life is worse or it's much harder or anything. It's just different. We are just different, but the same. We all have our own struggles. We all have our own challenges. And I always like to invite people to look through the differences that they see by the way I walk, or if they meet another person that has a disability that they notice, hey, they use crutches or they're in a wheelchair. And instead, try to look through that, honor it for what it is, but try to get to know. And we love when people ask us. The thing that I hated when people asked me when I was a kid and stuff was, why do you walk like that? What, did you hurt your knee? Did you hurt your ankle? Did you hurt your hip? But what Jakey's mom taught me was that she loved it when people came up and asked her about Jakey, because most people will avoid different like that. And I would just encourage people, don't avoid. Come up and give us a smile and introduce yourself. And just in a very loving way, the best you can is just ask the person if you're curious and get to know something about that you may not know. And it's a beautiful invitation because then there's the bond of curiosity and respect versus avoidance. And a lot of us avoid, and I know I did even when I had CP because I didn't want to go anything near what I had. And so that's, I think, the thing that really has helped me a lot is I get curious with people with disabilities now. I go up and talk to them and just say, hey, my name's Bonner. How are you? I, love to know how you got to got in a wheelchair. Were you born or something, or did you have something else in your life? It's just a beautiful way to approach people in those parts that we see as different. It opens up a beautiful dialogue and an instant like bond with people, and it's a really amazing way to avoid this terrible cancel culture and judgment and labeling people and stuff like that. It's to use that as the gateway to find the commonality between each other versus avoid it.
I love the intention of that, and I'm cautious or skeptical because I feel like if I would have said that to you when you were 25, I was like,
Yep.
yo, man, hi, I'm Jeremy. What's going on with your legs? Or I don't know how I would phrase it. Hopefully more
Yep. Yep.
eloquent and kind than that. But I feel like it's that there are some people out there that might not want to talk about it, or it might be shame inducing to say, hey, I see you in a way that you're hoping uh, that I don't see you. Does that make sense?
100%. And I think it's a great point. It's the hard part of never knowing where that person actually is in their journey. to being comfortable with their own disability or what they're challenged with. What I've said, I would say 8 out of 10 times, it's a very nice conversation. 1 out of 10 is it's very awkward because they're not expecting it because they're used to people either staring or purposely avoiding, which feels worse. And that's all I would say is that if we know 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 you're avoiding us, and or looking side eye and whispering to a friend or something, that's a million times worse than you coming up and making it really awkward and uncomfortable for them, because at least it's kind of the old adage that I've learned through my deep work is it's better to turn and face whatever it is, even if we're uncertain or we have fear around it. So I would invite everybody to kind of do that same thing when you meet somebody that has something that has caught your eye or has you've noticed about them, and come with love and knowing that they may full well rebuff your question or maybe really awkward. But I'll tell you, it feels a lot better to have an awkward situation than not know and see these people like looking at you or staring or pointing or other things like that doesn't feel good at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, especially if you approach with sincerity and kindness and a smile. And as you were describing that, I've put myself in that perspective of just sitting in a restaurant, living my life, and then seeing people look at me with disgust or derision, or just when we make eye contact, they look away embarrassed. Like that very brief sort of thought experiment, I could feel in my entire system of like, oh gosh, that feels so hard to live that way every day and face that every day. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, fuck. Okay, so that's a that's my takeaway with that. So that is a really healthy perspective, a really helpful perspective, I think, of like, I think that I don't necessarily realize how much of that exists, and this is perhaps my own bias or what is it, ableist perspective, where I'm not seeing things through the perspective of others. Okay, so I've got some work to do with that too then. And perhaps noticing when I do that, right? So hit me
Yeah.
up with some coaching here, Bonner. Like flip the script. Like how can I as a God, I'm even cautious of the language. I don't necessarily have a physical disability. So how can I be a better what's the word? Friend, stranger, human? Like is there like a little top tips and tricks that it's like, hey, stop doing this thing subconsciously because you're kind of acting like an asshole, and maybe consider doing these things?
Yeah, Juliana, the only girl that we've ever flown to the United States for her surgeries, she had a double amputation, and so I spent 3 months with her in Chalk, and she taught me this. She walked on her knees for 16 years of her life in a remote part of outside of Moshi, Tanzania, and it's bonkers that she walked her entire life on her knees. And unfortunately, that culture there is very skittish about people with disabilities. They have no idea what that person has, so they just completely avoid. They hide their kids. They do a lot of challenging things. So I asked her, I said, how do you survive for 16 years when everybody is focused on you or ashamed of you or making fun of you and everything like that? And she literally said, because she's not allowed to go to school because she's disabled, even though her brain's totally fine. She said, in Swahili, she said, hugs and smiles. She says, hugs and smiles are free. And I was like, holy fuck. And I just started crying because I was like, I try to make some of the simplest things in life so complex when I'm in my head. And here's an uneducated 16-year-old woman, just had a double amputation. And she told me that the reason why she's still alive and why she smiles and is so happy is because hugs and smiles are free. Is bonkers. And the trick, honestly, is that if you see somebody, even if you're uncomfortable, smile, eye contact, and smile. Even if they look away, even if they're embarrassed. You know what you just did? Nobody's kicked my ass for smiling at them. Nobody. And nobody's told me their day got shittier if I gave them a hug. And so what I always try to tell people is, if you can't give that person a hug, give yourself a hug, and smile at someone if you can't come up with words. And it's something that is the really two-step process, is that it's just, if you can hug somebody or hug the moment, you open up that space so clearly. And smiles is what breaks it all down. And I believe smiles and eyes are the gateways to the soul, because you can't fake a smile. When we do that like that, everybody's like, oh, that's the shittiest smile I've ever seen. Like, you're faking it, come on now. And your eyes don't lie. And so we need to be able to just smile at people. So I always tell people, that's like, when I do speaking gigs, one of the things I always say is, I want you to smile at, I want to smile at 20 more people today. And I want you to give 10 more hugs today. And see how you feel. And I said, so smiling is the best thing to break that. Step one is always just look in the eyes and smile. And then if they smile back, then just say, hey, how are you? And it's just a very warm, open greeting. And then based on their response, you can decide at that juncture if you'd like to dive into, hey, I was just curious. Can I ask you a question? Yeah, hey, I noticed that, your right hand looks a little tighter than your left, and just wondered, if you could share a little bit about that. So it's not saying, hey, do you have a disability, or hey, what do you have? Because that can come across as like, whoa, like, but if you just say, hey, I noticed this, was curious if you could share more. You're just inviting them into that space, and then they could be like, yep, I was born with this, or da 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 da, and boom, on you go. And it's a beautiful way just to invite them into a space without putting them into maybe more of a corner or an awkward situation. You leave it very open-ended is very important. Then you're not judging, or it doesn't make it obvious. You just say, hey, oh, just was curious about this, or hey, just noticed a little bit of this, and it softens it a lot.
Yeah, I love that, man. I feel like my girlfriend's used to this line that I use pretty often, which is, I have a question. It's like
that's it.
Now it's become this loaded statement, because she's like, okay, here we go. But
No,
with the right intention and the right vibe, curious, compassionate inquiry. Thanks for sharing that, man. And I just want to reiterate, I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, and just willingness to have these kind of conversations where a knucklehead like me can ask questions that hopefully help me to live life more smoothly, and help others to live life more smoothly. And to those listening, I think it's a really important conversation to have, because it seems like these sorts of dialogues are pushed aside because they are uncomfortable, because they are difficult, and because they don't happen very frequently. And so it's easy to ignore them because they are rare experiences, right? So hopefully
agreed.
we can help normalize these kinds of things.
Yeah,
um
agreed.
well, I'm so glad I got to chat with you, and that you're not just like an Instagram account to me anymore. Like, that's Bonner. I love that dude. Where do you want to direct people listening? I know you've got an Instagram. I know you've got a website. I can put all that in the show notes, but is there
Yeah.
something you want to plug or promote at the moment?
Yeah, projectpossible.org is always the best place to start. It has information on each of our centers that we currently have. We do get a lot of questions about, like, where's your centers and what do they actually do? So we just have a nice brief description of that on the website. And then the Instagram is at projectpossible.org. That's the handle of the foundation one, is at projectpossible.org. But yeah, those are the two best places. The documentary that now is, shoot, almost 15 years old. If people want to trip down memory lane, it's for free on our website now. Again, the filmmakers made that for free, and they gave it to the foundation after it was made, after it did the tour through all the film festivals and everything. they gave it back to us. So it's a beautiful thing that those three filmmakers did, is they just said, what you're doing is, we think it's really special. So, and now we've got the book back in our hands, so we're working on, and I'll probably need to chat with you and Traver and stuff about self-publication, because now we've got the book. So I got to figure out that whole world and how it works now that we don't have the big publisher doing all that stuff for us. So may have to reach out to you and see any guidance you have too on that.
Yeah, bro, I know the exact person to direct you to. So
Perfect.
let's connect.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. That would be super helpful.
Yeah, for real. And all right, man. Well, thank you again. You're just a marvelous human with a huge heart, and what an inspiration. So happy to support, happy I know you, and happy to help however I can. Asterisk, maybe with walking in Africa, but maybe not. So we'll keep in touch offline on that one, man. And yeah, do keep me posted if I can support or assist in any way. You know, I'm happy to spread the word and direct you to good humans as I can.
I really appreciate it, man. And again, I followed your work for a while and everything. I appreciate what you do out there. You're also, the way you deliver it and everything like that is it's just, it's great. It makes me laugh. It makes me smile a lot. And I just, when we kind of connected, I was just like, I'd love it. I'd be honored to be on your podcast and everything. So it really means a lot to me as well, to someone I respect so much.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. And I'm sure we'll have many more conversations in the future, hopefully.
Definitely. I definitely agree.